Hi everybody, it's Owen here from Old Wells Forge, and today we're going to be making a set of tongs. Oh, forgot my glasses there. Safety first, everybody. And so I just thought I'd kind of go through the steps on making it, demonstrate it. I've got a couple camera views here for you to see, and yeah, hopefully it's clear enough and you'll get an idea on a quick, efficient way to make tongs that are pretty rugged, work very well. You can see starting off here that I'm defining the shoulder of what's going to be the rein portion of the tongs. And so I'm starting by using the corner of my anvil to put quite a sharp indent and shoulder. You can use hardy tools to do this. There's a few different methods, but I just use the corner of my anvil. Works pretty good. And I just keep flipping it over and making those deep indents about halfway, flattening it out whenever it starts to bubble a little bit. And yeah, it'll take the metal down much quicker than just beating it on the flat of the anvil. I've left all of this in real time for this video, mostly because one of the guys online that was asking some questions on a blacksmithing Facebook group was inquiring about videos that show the whole process and don't cut things out or anything like that. I've mostly done that. I cheated a little bit in that I just made one of the reins. I had a set of tongs, tong reins already beat out that I keep on my bench just for time when you need a quick set of tongs. So I used those to finish it since I didn't have the time that day to make both sets of reins. But I did make one rein just to show the process involved in that. Don't be afraid to get the metal nice and hot for this portion. You really have to move the metal quite a bit, and getting it really good bright yellow it just saves a lot of work, a lot of pounding, and a lot of heats. Now here I'm using another technique. I've taken down the reins to kind of a rough stage, but I want to continue making a taper from about half inch by 3/8 up by the shoulder, down to about a little little smaller than 3/8 square at the bottom end, not quite 1/4 inch. So I'm just laying it halfway on and off the anvil, and then striking half on, half off, and it just puts a kind of a wrinkle in it. And then you just flip it over and do the same thing, and you just do that back and forth, and then you do what I'm doing here and just smooth it all out again. And it takes the metal down remarkably fast. About the slowest way to reduce metal, to draw it out, is simply hammering flat on the anvil. I guess I should have mentioned earlier that I'm starting with a piece of 1 inch by 3/8 flat bar, and I've marked out about 6 inches to make my reins out of. So in here I'm striking half on, half off, alternating back and forth. The other thing you'll notice when I work steel on my anvil is that the steel moves back and forth, not the hammer. The hammer, as much as possible, hammers in exactly the same location every time, and I move the steel under the hammer. This is more accurate for shaping your work, as you don't have to make fine little adjustments in direction whilst on your downstroke with your hammer. Now I'm getting down to a little bit more of the finer work, where I simply am smoothing out and bringing that rein down to the final shape. So I switch to a little bit lighter hammer, gives me a little more control, and reduces the danger of overworking or thinning the metal out too much. Also by this point my arm was starting to wear out a little bit, and so I switched to the lighter hammer as it's a little bit easier on my arm and gives it a break. So in here you should be able to see that I'm actually holding a bit of a diagonal. One thing I always do with my the reins of my tongs is I take off the corners. I don't make them round, as I like the feel of the sort of square or rectangle shape in my hand, but by taking off those corners, it doesn't make it, it makes it a little less sharp, and it looks good. It gives a good aesthetic look to them. I generally, you want to make sure that all the work that's happening is happening under your hammer. So I do all four sides, even though some action has happened on the bottom side, which is against the anvil. I still hammer all four sides. Every side gets an even number of blows if possible, and makes it coming out, nice and symmetrical that way. And I give it one quick, maybe more than one, I'm not sure, but I go over the faces again to make sure it's nice and square. When doing this finishing work, I always try to make sure that I don't have two blows that hammer in the same spot. Keep working my metal back and forth so that it doesn't get thinned out too much. These are pretty light blows. They're not heavy blows. I'm just trying to affect the very surface of the metal. So here you can see, you can cut it off. I usually leave about 3 inches for where the rivet goes and the jaws, depending on what you're making for a set of tongs. So here's the 2 that I had pre-built that I keep, and so that's what we'll actually be making this set of tongs out of. So as I said, I left about 3 inches, so I mark that about halfway, and that is going to be the separation between the actual jaw portion and the sort of boss where the hole for the rivet goes. So once again, I'm using the corner of the anvil to create that separation. You can use hardy tools. It may do better if you have the hardy tools available. I've never bothered to build them. This has always worked fine for me. And I also take off the corners there. I find it's just stronger and it's less likely to crack when you twist the jaws around, rounding things off. That was one. Now we do the same thing to the other one. So now you can punch the hole first, or you can twist the jaws. Here I'm going to twist the jaws first, just to show you how, because I'm going to be taking these and drawing them out to make a set of scrolling tongs. Whereas, so there you can see I've twisted it. So if you were just going to make a standard set of tongs, this is all you would need to do. And using the corner of the anvil so I don't mess up my work, I just hammer out where that twist was made, so it's nice and smooth transition, no ridges. So at this point, you would jump ahead to doing the rivet and such. If this is what all you were doing was just a standard set of tongs. Here, I'm going to stretch these out, so a little bit extra work involved. Never work your metal till it's all the way down as cold as it could possibly go. If you're going to have to heat it up again anyway, you might as well heat it up sooner rather than later. Once it starts getting hard to work, Getting down to that red heat, throw her back in the fire. Especially like now where you have two pieces of metal to work, the other one's probably going to be hot enough to get started on. Obviously, because of how I'm stretching these out to be long and thin, you wouldn't even have to do the twist that I did at the step I did. You could have just stretched. I could have just stretched these straight out, but I wanted to show you how to do the twist for making just a standard set of tongs. So here I'm just working on rounding off, excuse me, each of the tapered out portions, tapering them off and then putting a nice rounded edge on them. This is actually, believe it or not, the first set of scrolling tongs I've ever made. I've never used them before. So now I'm getting ready to punch. So I have a punch with, that's about a 3/8 punch. So I'll get it lined up in the center of the boss, give it one good strike, and then cool my tip. Very important to take care of your tools. And the best way to do that is keep them cool for these hot punches. Hammer it down through, and then when you feel it bounce off the anvil, you know it's just about ready. Flip it over, line it up with the other side. Punch it through. This one I don't think quite punched all the way through. I had to cool off my tip of the punch and knock it back through the other way. One mistake here, I hadn't made a set of tongs in so long, I'd almost forgotten. Usually I do one square and one round hole. That helps to seat the pivot pin well into the, it kind of conforms to that side, so it only spins on one side, making a very nice, tight, solid pivot point. I actually forgot to do that on this one. I made 2 round ones. So you'll notice here a little bit later that I have to drift out one of them with a square punch. And we set up here for a pin with a piece of 3/8 round rod. And just measure the 2 sort of bosses. See what you got for total thickness. And then I add 1/4 to 3/8 to stick out on either side. And that'll be the part that hammers out to make the flat part of the rivet that you see on either side of the set of tongs. And yes, I know it looks like the fire is shooting out the back of my forge onto my propane tank, waiting for a catastrophic explosion that would level my shop, but it's just an optical illusion. It isn't actually that close. Holes were actually a little bit too tight, so this pin actually went in much harder than normal. Normally I drift them out enough for the pin to fall in very easily. And you can see here I go, why won't that work? Then I realize, oh yeah, I need to make that hole square anyway. So I give it a few taps just to sort of set it and get it in place. Then I use a black of a ball peen hammer and peen out the rivet. I suppose you could use a rivet header and things like that, but I find this adds a nice aesthetic and works very well. Usually do that about a few times on either side to make sure it's nice and even. As you can tell, I don't care whether it's all riveted solid together, because as you'll see here in a few minutes, I'm about to fix that. So now, the key is to stretch this out. I'm not sure why I switched it here, but I did. Stretch this out so that it closes all the way tight and opens all the way up. And this is forming that rivet inside the tongs. And I decided I didn't quite have this tight enough the way I wanted it. So rivet it out again, put it back in. It's important to do this when it's hot, and it'll shape that rivet exactly the same as the tong halves and give you a nice smooth motion and movement. And then in there and work it while it does it. The metal on the outside and the inside expand and contract I guess in this case at a different rate. And so it will go very hard at first, but you keep on working it as it cools, and then it goes very nice and smooth and easy, with no sticking anywhere. And now it's time to figure out what the heck I'm going to do with these ends. So just bringing the jaws down so they're nice and even and not sort of mismatched in height. Making sure I haven't damaged my rivet in the movement there, but even if it had, it wouldn't be a big deal. I could heat it back up, put it back in the vise, and sort of reform it. And there you go. There's a set of tongs, basically from start to finish. And I hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful. There you have it. Hope everybody has themselves a good day, and keep hammering.